Hello to all Cinemaster lovers. Hope you enjoy watching. Let's get started. During a boat trip with her friends, Toddy laments the fact that she is moving out of the city to study and says that she will miss Clara and Loli very much. As the trio embraces, all the lights in the city go out, and a trail of green light stretches across the sky like an aurora borealis. Frightened, Clara enters the cabin to send a distress signal, but discovers that all the devices have stopped working. Suddenly, the young woman sees Loli's body lying on the deck, and when she tries to go out to help her, all the doors close. Meanwhile, on the coast, residents gather in the streets to create a demonstration, demanding that the authorities do something to bring power back to the city. That night, Juan was playing cards with his friends when the lights went out, and at the same time, all the phones stopped working. Hearing a noise coming from outside, Alfredo rushes upstairs to check that his wife is all right and discovers that Vicente, his son, has fainted. When she looks out of the window, the group notices that something is wrong as it suddenly starts to snow. However, within a few seconds, Anna realizes that these snowflakes are not ordinary, as they were the ones that caused her son to faint. Worried about the young man, Alfredo takes the key to open the door, but his wife prevents him from doing so because she suspects there is some toxic material in the air. To avoid becoming the next victims, the survivors rush to check the windows and make sure none of them are open. If any particle of that unknown substance enters the house, the lives of all of them will be at risk. So, Russo begins to panic. The man is worried about Flavia and her children, but he knows he can't go out to help them, and this upsets him. As all means of communication have been interrupted, Russo decides to take a risk and opens the door to meet his family. However, when he is crossing the road to try to get to his car, he faints and falls unconscious before he even gets into the vehicle. A few hours later, Anna hears a noise coming from the basement, and everyone goes down to find out what's going on. Hearing a woman's voice coming from the other side of the door leading to the garage, Juan opens the door while Alfredo prepares to shoot if necessary. When the young girl appears, the group discovers that she is harmless. And while Anna helps her warm up, Juan and his friends walk to the garage. At that moment, the man's hope is renewed as he believes he will be able to go home, but his happiness is short-lived. Turning the key, Juan realizes that the vehicles have also stopped working and begins to suspect that the city has been hit by an electromagnetic pulse. Electromagnetic energy is capable of interfering with any type of electronic system, and because of it, all the devices stopped working. It's just about dawn, and the baker who lives across the street gets up to go to work. When he sees Mr. Alicio about to open the window, Alfredo tries to warn him not to, but the old man doesn't understand and ends up being hit by the snow. When she sees her husband unconscious, his wife tries to help him and ends up joining him. Worried about what might happen to his ex-wife when she gets up to go to work, Juan decides to go after her and enlists the help of his friends to put together a protective suit so that he doesn't come into contact with the snow. As soon as he leaves the house, Juan realizes that the suit has worked because all the other people who have been infected have fallen unconscious within a few seconds. As he walks through the streets, he comes across bodies scattered everywhere and covered in snow, but this doesn't stop him from continuing his mission. After a few hours of walking through heavy snowfall, Juan spots a man approaching and decides to hurry as he doesn't know the guy's true intentions. While crossing a train line, the man comes across several bodies strewn across the tracks and realizes that there are dozens of people trapped inside the wagons. At this point, he decides to get into the vehicle, and after giving the survivors a bottle of water, Juan leaves with the promise that he will seek help. When they see the man walking away, all the passengers who are trapped on the train despair because they know that this stranger is the only chance they have of surviving. Meanwhile, at Anna and Alfredo's house, the situation is becoming increasingly tense. After spending several hours trapped with people she's only just met, Ininga decides to take a chance and brave the snow. However, Alfredo forbids her to do so and reveals that he has built a makeshift mask so that he can leave safely to seek help. When he finally arrives at the building where his ex-wife lives, Juan discovers that the glass door has been smashed by a vehicle and sees the body of the doorman on the ground, having been hit by snow. The man quickly climbs the stairs to Elena's apartment and comes across some residents gathered in a prayer group. Upon entering the apartment, Juan realizes that the place is empty and begins to think that both his daughter and his ex are no longer alive. However, soon afterward, Elena turns up and reveals that her daughter has been out all night. According to her, Clara went out with some friends from school, and after the blackout, the woman was no longer able to contact her. Worried about his daughter, Juan asks the name of the girl Clara went to visit and decides to go to the school to see if he can find out her address. But when he opens the door, he sees all Valina's neighbors standing in the doorway, realizes that they're up to no good. So Juan decides to take her with him. but they are both stopped midway, and the neighbors begin to wonder how they managed to get there without being contaminated. When they discover that he has worn a mask to protect himself, some men try to steal it, but Juan pulls out his gun and threatens to shoot them. In this way, the man makes his way to escape with his ex-wife, but ends up being chased through the building, so he breaks into an empty apartment to hide. While looking for some clothes to protect herself from the snow, Elena sees her neighbor's bloodied body in the bathtub, and Juan tries to calm her down. When he hears the sound of men trying to open the door, the man hands Elena his mask and helps her escape through the window to look for her daughter. Soon after, the neighbors manage to open the door. So, Juan broke the window and used a plastic bag to protect himself. Afraid of being contaminated, the man decides to flee, and Juan builds a makeshift mask to go after Elena. However, when he jumped out of the window, the man fainted because he couldn't breathe and woke up minutes later in a vehicle with masked people. When the driver takes off his mask, Juan is relieved to discover that it is Alfredo who is driving. On her way to Clara's school, Elena found the group and returned to rescue her ex-husband, who was found unconscious. At this point, Juan is surprised to discover that the vehicle is working, and his friend explains that old cars are not affected by the electromagnetic pulse. Minutes later, the group is back at Alfredo's house and tries to make contact with other survivors via radio, but gets no response. Looking out of the window, Lucas realizes that someone is approaching, so the men put on their masks to go down and investigate the guy. When he sees all those guns pointed in his direction, the traveler decides to follow the locals' orders and enters an isolated room to be interrogated. But when Bonito takes off his mask, Alfredo immediately recognizes him and apologizes for the bad reception. After telling a sad story about how half of his neighbors lost their lives in a tragic way, Bonito asks to borrow his car to take supplies to them, but Alfredo refuses. While they talk, Omar steals the car and drives home. Minutes later, as he's passing under a bridge, the man sees a red flash in the sky and is distracted by the image. He then has an accident and passes out. After putting on snowsuits and masks, Juan and Elena decide to go out to look for their daughter. And on the way to the school, they look for old cars that might still be running to take them there. However, they are not lucky enough to find an old enough vehicle in all that snow and have to make their way on foot. Upon arriving at the school, Elena goes after the registers containing the students' addresses while Juan continues his mission to find a working car. That afternoon, Inga returned with a vehicle she had found on the way to the court where her brother was playing ball and said she saw his body on the ground. With nowhere to go, the young woman decided to return to the family that took her in, and Alfredo used the vehicle to go in search of supplies. When he finally finds a working car, Juan drives to the school to pick up Elena and discovers that the woman has found a young man who has been locked in the bathroom all night. The young man was lured to the school by his classmates the night before, and they decided to lock him in to play a prank. The idea was to free Pablo a few minutes later, but the young men ended up being contaminated by the snow when they reached the schoolyard. With Pablo's help, the couple managed to get to Lai's address and break into the house looking for her daughter, but find all the residents' bodies on a table by the pool. After checking that none of the girls is his daughter, Juan is relieved. But Pablo despairs when he realizes that all his relatives have been eliminated. The truth is that instead of giving them Lai's address, the young man got the couple to take him to their house. And after discovering that his parents are gone, Pablo decides to help them look for Clara. Realizing that the young man has a fever, Elena convinces her husband to stop at a pharmacy to find some medicine for him. Minutes after entering the establishment, the couple is approached by a pregnant woman who is about to give birth, and Elena, who is a doctor, decides to help her deliver the baby. While everyone is distracted, Julieta's boyfriend enters the pharmacy and, after stealing the car key, locks the couple in the bathroom. When the armed man leaves, Pablo opens the door, and the trio continues their journey. On the way, they realize that all the bodies that were scattered around the streets have disappeared, including those that were on the tracks. When he gets into the wagon to look for the survivors, Juan realizes that they have all disappeared and decides to go back to Alfredo's house. That night, Julieta and her boyfriend stop to fill up the car they stole and end up being attacked. After seeing something moving in the snow, Dario decides to go there to check what's going on and is the first to disappear. Then, the vehicle Julieta is in is hit and dragged through the snow until it falls into a ravine. After checking some names in Alfredo's phone books, Juan finds the address of Lai's parents and decides to go after them to look for his daughter. Concerned for his friend's safety, Alfredo takes the car and decides to go after him to give him a lift there. However, after driving for a few kilometers, the pair come across a wall of vehicles piled up blocking the way and begin to wonder how all those cars got there. While Juan investigates what might have happened, Alfredo sees some military vehicles approaching, and one of the soldiers reveals that the capital has become a restricted area so they can't cross. However, instead of returning home, The two men decide to follow the military but end up being spotted and have to flee to avoid being eliminated. During the escape, the car ends up sliding in the snow and flips over, but Juan and Alfredo manage to survive. Suddenly, a horde of giant insects appears and attacks the soldiers, who try to fight back but end up being completely destroyed by the monsters. Seeing the creatures approaching, the two friends run away and manage to hide in a safe place. Sometime later, they come out of their hiding place to check that the monsters have gone and go down the stairs that lead to the terrace of a building. After taking the gun from one of the soldiers, the pair walk carefully through the city and discover that all those bodies that have disappeared have been taken by the giant insects. When one of those creatures runs towards him, Juan immediately starts shooting and manages to eliminate it. However, the noise of the shots ends up attracting new monsters, and they have to flee to avoid being devoured like the creature Juan has just eliminated. Terrified, Juan and Alfredo try to break into a church, but the door is locked, and they end up being cornered. Luckily, the survivors who are sheltering inside decide to help them and set fire to the insects. While the monsters are burning, Mickey opens the door so that the fugitives can enter and takes them to the place where the church members are sheltering. At that moment, they meet Omar again, who does everything he can to convince the nun that those guys are dangerous, but Rita ignores him. When Alfredo asks where those bugs came from, Jorgito decides to take them to the bell tower and shows them the fireballs that are falling from the sky. Immediately, Juan realizes that the Earth is suffering an alien invasion and decides to rush after his daughter because he needs to find Clara before the creatures find her. However, when he climbs onto the roof of the church and looks down, he realizes that the streets are overrun by a horde of alien insects that are transporting human bodies to their nest. At that moment, Juan realizes that he has to get those people out of there because very soon the church will be invaded and everyone inside will be eliminated. So, the man guides the survivors to a bus so they can take shelter while Alfredo opens a secret passage that will lead them to a tunnel. The team's goal is to get to the other side of the bridge, but the aliens appear before the whole team can cross. Hearing a baby's cry, the monsters gather around the bus, but just as they are about to attack, Rita rings the church bell to attract them. Knowing that she wouldn't be able to walk at the same pace as the younger ones, the nun decided to stay behind so as not to risk slowing them down. Then, when the creatures are about to invade the church, Rita and Mango spread a flammable liquid everywhere and set the place on fire. While Juan is looking for a working vehicle to transport the members of the group, Alfredo is attacked by a giant insect, but Yorgo manages to scare it away. As soon as Alfredo manages to start the truck, new monsters appear, and they gather to eliminate them. Immediately, Juan orders his friends to climb into the wagon and start shooting at the creatures while Alfredo speeds away. After a few hours of travel, the group arrives at Alfredo's house, and the man rushes to check that his wife is all right. At this point, Juan says goodbye to the friends he met at church, and Omar decides to join him on his mission to find his daughter. However, when he enters the house, the man sees Clara and is relieved to discover that his daughter is alive. When asked how she managed to get there, Clara reveals that she remembered the card game night where her father always got together to play with his friends on weekends. That night, Juan and Elena spend the night with their daughter. Meanwhile, Alfredo talks to his neighbor about the monsters he's seen scattered around the city and says that everyone needs to leave as soon as possible. At this point, one of the neighbors suggests an exchange and says that he will give up his trailer so that Alfredo and his family can leave. In return, Roberto will keep his house. After consulting with his wife, Alfredo accepts the deal, and they all get into the trailer to drive away behind the vehicle that Eninga is driving. Alfredo's plan is to take all those people to his house on an island near the city. But Eninga and Omar are planning to make their way to Campo Deo, where the military are gathering as many survivors as possible. During the trip, Clara wakes up and reveals that she was at Lai's house with Todd before going to Alfredo's house. However, the man finds this information strange as he knows that she borrowed his boat to go sailing with her friends. After a few hours on the road, the group spots a shopping center full of people and decides to approach carefully to investigate. As he enters the garage, Juan sees Bobby and Mickey, and they explain that the place has become a refuge for survivors. That evening, when everyone is gathered for dinner, Mickey comes up to talk to Clara, and the young woman starts acting very strangely. When they realize that their daughter is not well, Elena and Juan try to calm her down and take her to a quiet place so that she can rest. At this point, Alfredo approaches and says that Clara was lying when she said she didn't take the boat because her signature was in the logbook. The next morning, the survivors wake up to good news. The snow that wiped out millions of people has stopped falling. At that moment, everyone is happily celebrating the fact that they are still alive, and suddenly a group of masked men appears. Seeing all those people outside, the men get out of the vehicle and start shooting. When he discovers that Anna and Inga are trapped outside, Alfredo immediately goes after his wife, and Juan helps him get rid of the gunmen. After checking that his wife is all right, Alfredo hears Tony's screams and runs to him to find out what's going on. Just then, they find Mickey, who has been shot, and Elena tries to stop the bleeding. Suddenly, Lucas appears in the company of a large group of soldiers who are there to take the survivors to Campo Deo. When asked how he found those soldiers, Lucas reveals that he can't remember, and Juan realizes that he has lost his memory, just like Clara. Despite being seriously injured, Mickey fights with all his might to stay alive until he reaches Campo Deo, where he can receive medical attention. Meanwhile, one of the gunmen who managed to escape returns to the subway, which is being used as a nest for the giant insects. But instead of attacking him, the aliens make way for him as if he were facing another being of the same species. When they arrive at Campo Deo, the civilians are trained by the military and learn how to use weapons to fight the monsters that have invaded the planet. The goal now goes beyond survival, as the humans need to reclaim their home if they want to keep their species alive. That morning, a new group of soldiers arrives at the refuge, bringing more survivors, and Alfredo soon recognizes his neighbor. He immediately goes after Roberto to ask what happened to the other residents of the neighborhood and discovers that they have all been eliminated by the aliens. Hours later, Mickey loses his life as a result of the gunshot wound, and his friends organize a funeral to say goodbye to him. When they find out that a tactical team is on its way to the capital, Juan, Alfredo, and Lucas decide to go with them and on the way, spot some aircraft flying overhead. At this point, the group is delighted to learn that there are other survivors and that more people are organizing to fight the aliens. After a few hours of walking, they arrive at a railroad and split into two groups to repair the train and turn it into a battle tank. When they arrive at the first stop, Group B goes down to survey the area, and Pablo ends up getting separated from his friends. Meanwhile, the rest of the team heads towards the bridge as they intend to use that train to make their way to the capital. As well as preparing for the impact, the soldiers know that they will have to face a horde of giant insects if their plan fails. However, after the impact, everyone is relieved because the barrier built up by the vehicles has just been overcome. When they arrive at their final destination, the soldiers break into a building and take old radio sets to transmit a message to everyone in the country. While part of the team is busy trying to fix the device, Ininga and some other military personnel are on patrol to make sure that none of those monsters show up unawares. As soon as Alberto manages to fix the device, one of the soldiers records a message telling all the survivors to go to Campo Deo. This message will be repeated every 5 minutes. And when the voice is heard on the radio, all the refugees sheltering in Campo Deo will celebrate because it means that the mission has been successfully completed. At that moment, Alfredo's team uses a flare to tell the other team that they are alive, and they celebrate when Pablo also responds with a flare. Looking at the horizon, Omar spots a blue light radiating from the center of the city, but the soldiers decide to ignore it and prepare to leave. While waiting for the vehicles to be ready, Alfredo takes his friends to one of the apartments in the building and invites them to play cards. However, during the game, after losing a few matches, Lucas takes a knife and hits Omar. He then runs off, and Juan goes after him while Alfredo tries to help the wounded man. When he finally finds Lucas, Juan asks what's going on, and the man starts speaking in jumbled sentences that don't make any sense. Looking at the blue light spreading across the city, Lucas smiles and throws himself off the building. When he realizes that Ininga and her team have not yet returned from their mission, the captain begins to worry and sets out to find them. Just then, he sees Mauro approaching and asks why it took them so long. However, instead of answering the question, the man eliminates his superior so that another group of people can invade the building. When they realize that they are in danger, Juan and Alfredo go after Omar, and the trio tries to get out of the stairwell unnoticed. Along the way, they meet Bob and try to warn him, but soon discover that the man has also been contaminated by the aliens, and they have to flee as they are being chased by the army. When they reach the train, the trio finds the driver and orders him to start it. When they realize that they won't be able to catch up, the traitors decide to end the chase, and Juan decides to investigate to find out what that blue light is. At this point, he says goodbye to Alfredo and asks his friend to return to Campo Deo to warn the refugees about what has happened. In the company of the train driver, Juan gets out of the wagon and follows the noise of the gunshots. At this point, he sees aliens and humans living together in complete harmony and begins to suspect that the creatures have brainwashed them. Entering a building, Juan looks down and sees hundreds of people lined up as if they were soldiers preparing to go to war. They are all gathered around the blue light, and out of it comes a handful of fingers making strange signs. Apparently, that creature is controlling people, and they are acting as if they were mere puppets. At this point, Juan begins to suspect that Clara is just an infiltrator, as he believes that his real daughter has already been eliminated. And if you like the video, like and subscribe for more